And welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to focus on two elements that are going to add another layer to our images, and that is of drop shadows and reflections. So to get started, I went ahead and made a copy of my sword image that I previously had made. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my quick selection tool to go ahead and, of course, select the sword here that I have. Now, there are two things that we can approach this from. We could, of course, just grab our move tool and move the sword and make a background fill here, or the gradient, inside of this area that we moved the sword from. However, this is going to cause issues with distortion and destruction of the original image, so we're actually not going to approach it from this way. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and right click on this image here, and we're going to use that to go ahead and make it into another layer. So of course we can just add another layer, which would allow us to do that. We can of course Control X, which will cut it as well and paste it in place. Or we can of course use our nice little shortcut here where we can just go ahead and we can go to our quick selection tool here and right click and choose layer via cut. And of course that will now move our sword onto its own layer. If I go ahead and hide that layer, you can see we have effectively the same thing as if I had just moved that. However, it allows us to keep that original sword free and doesn't distort it in any way on that first layer. Additionally, we can go to our first layer now, and I could go ahead and do a selection here. So let's just go ahead and do an inverse of that. So now we have just this transparent area here selected. And we can go ahead now and fill that with a gradient, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and, since this is a shadow effect, I'm just going to go ahead and do a gradient here. And I'm just going to go ahead and click that gradient and drag it down. Of course, that makes it white. I want it probably the other direction. And there we go. We have a nice kind of drop shadow. The nice thing about this, because we're using gradient, it's a little more tapered, so it's not as harsh. I can go back to my sword now, use my move tool, and I can just slide that over just a little bit. Oh, it helps if I grab the right layer here. Make sure you grab your sword layer and move that over. And now, of course, you can see I have a nice drop shadow effect here. Now, of course, if I wanted to do a reflection, remember reflections happen plenty of times in real life. Whether, for example, it's a puddle of water or maybe it's a mirror, we can do the same thing here. Now, I'm going to go make sure I'm on my sword layer. So I'm going to go ahead and rename that so I can keep track of this. So this is sword. This is shadow. So we want to go ahead and create a reflection. Well, the easiest thing to do is go ahead and duplicate the sword. So I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate layer and call this reflection. And so now I have my sword, I have my reflection. And if I want to go ahead and move that underneath, I can do so. However, the issue I'm going to run in with is you can see I'm very quickly running out of canvas to work in. So this is going to get us into also something new that we can do, which is resizing our canvas for larger images. And the way we can do that is just coming up here and going to Image, going down to Canvas Size. Now we of course could just plug in whatever height and width we want. However, the most important thing to look at here is the anchor. And that's going to tell us what direction do we want to grow this image in. So for example, you can see right now it is in the center. So if I say I want to make this 128 pixels, now I want to make it bigger in height, and I just leave that anchor there in the middle, watch what happens. I click OK. It will add height in the top and in the bottom. So it adds it both up and down. However, because I want to move underneath this image, I'm going to use Control Z, and I'm going to do the same thing, canvas size, 128. But I'm going to click up here at the top so it grows down with my image. Now, of course, I could make this a smaller set, so maybe like I only want 96 pixels. That's fine. Let's use 96 here because we don't necessarily need a full-on growth for our source. We just need to move it down a little bit. So I'm going to click OK. I can, of course, click back on reflection here. I can move it, and you can see we haven't really lost much of our sword. We might have lost a little bit here of detail, but we can always fill that back in, and it's okay because we are going to be updating that here in just a moment. Let's go ahead, though, and just for now use our eyedropper tool to grab that blue background that we previously had. Make sure we're on the shadow layer, though. Grab that blue background. Go to our paint bucket tool and just fill that blue in just so we can extend that background all the way down. Going back to my move tool, I'm going to go ahead and click on that reflection sword. And you see, this is why I didn't need to worry about it coming all the way down. And I want to make it so that this sword is effectively just a reflection of this one. And I say, I also want to transform that. I want to maybe rotate that. Maybe I want to rotate it just 90 degrees so that way it's looking like it's kind of more underneath it. And that's perfectly fine. And let's go ahead and patch up that corner there here real quick. We'll just go ahead and use our pencil tool real quick. Set that back to black and add those 2 black dots on there. There we go. That's all fixed up. Now, how do we actually do the reflection? Because right now, yes, we've made a reflection of it, but there's no gradient to it, no effect that's kind of showing that this is fading away from one side of the image to the other. And so what we're going to do here is we're actually going to go ahead and add in a gradient layer that's going to kind of fade away. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm just going to go ahead and put the sword right here for now. That's okay. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the gradient tool. I'm going to set a couple things up in there first. The first of which is I'm going to make sure my opacity is set to 100 and that transparency is checked. Awesome. Then let's go up here and go to the very top. And under basics, you'll see one right here, which is foreground to transparent. And so it's this middle one right here. And this is what I want to use to kind of make my image kind of disappear into the background. Now, of course, right now it's set to black and white, and that's not what I need. I need it to match this background color, which in this case is blue. So we're going to use our eyedropper. Go ahead and click on that. So now we have our foreground set to that. Now we can switch back to our gradient tool. Now if I just go ahead and start doing this, right now the way it is, it's going to pretty much take over the whole image because remember we don't have anything selected at this point. So let's go ahead and grab our good old quick select tool. Select our sword here. And so this will restrict that gradient to being within inside this zone. Switch back to my gradient. And I want it so that as I move down this image, this sword is going to disappear. So I'm just going to drag this across. And you can see right now the sword, of course, as I drew it, is very transparent up here, and it becomes more visible here. I say, you know, I don't want that. I want it to go the other way. I want it to be as it moves farther away from the source image for it to be less visible. So I can just simply drag that along this way. And you can see the sword has kind of faded away into the page here. All right, or I might say, you know, I want that even more faded. I'm going to drag this out like this. And you see now we can see the sword has kind of really disappeared into the canvas here quite well. And of course, I can still move this around, and you notice that the gradient will follow it. All right, so it gives us a kind of a nice effect here. And if I use Control-0 just to reset this, you can see, of course, how that reflection is now down here. And you can see why I didn't need to go to 128, because at this point where the sword exists, it has already moved in to be part of that same page. And if I hit Control-D just to deselect it, we can see we've now created a sword with a nice drop shadow here. And we've also created a nice reflection.